My name is Erin Collins, and the night my sister proved exactly what I meant to her started with 5 quiet words at a check-in desk. I'm sorry. Your name's not here. I had flown to Lake Tahoe telling myself it would be simple. I'd show up, sit in the back, clap when she walked down the aisle, hand over my envelope during the reception, smile for a few pictures, go home. I wasn't there to be noticed. I was there because, for some stupid reason, I still believed sister meant something. When the staff member scrolled up and down his tablet and shook his head, I thought it was a typo, a mix-up. Maybe my name was misspelled. Maybe I'd been marked as a +1. Anything but the truth. I stepped aside, called my sister, and listened as the line clicked. She didn't sound rushed or nervous. She sounded annoyed I existed. When I told her I was at the front desk and they could not find my name, she laughed under her breath and asked, almost bored, if I really thought I would be invited. There it was. No accident, no misunderstanding, just a decision. I ended the call before she could hang up on me, opened my clutch, and pulled out the small cream envelope I had been carrying for weeks. I had come to give her something that would have changed her life. Instead, I left it on a table by the entrance, wrote her name on the front, turned around, and walked out without looking back. Days later, that envelope would cost her a $2.8 million mansion she thought should have been hers. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. Long before that night, the patterns in our family had already carved the distance between my sister and me. It began quietly, almost invisibly, in the way small comments shaped who we were allowed to be. Growing up, Whitney was always the one who fit neatly into the picture my parents wanted to present to the world. She was polished, charming, easy to explain at dinner parties. I was the child who colored outside the lines and asked too many questions about how people lived and why things had to be done the same way as everyone else. As we got older, that difference turned into something sharper. Whitney excelled in every environment that rewarded predictability. Teachers adored her. Coaches praised her attitude. Relatives called her our little star. And every Christmas, someone would ask what new achievement she had added to her list. I sat through those moments without reacting, because I learned early that showing any discomfort only made the spotlight on her shine brighter. My role was to clap and smile as if the contrast between us didn't matter. My parents never said they preferred her, but preference has a way of revealing itself even when the words stay polite. When I brought home art projects or science experiments I had poured myself into, they complimented me with the same tone people use for an interesting hobby. When Whitney brought home a certificate, they framed it. She was the daughter who made sense to them, and I was the one who needed a little more structure. They didn't mean harm, I think, but intention never protected anyone from the impact of being quietly ranked. By the time we reached high school, the path seemed predetermined. Whitney joined every club that looked good on applications and collected leadership positions the way some people collected souvenirs. I took part-time jobs, saved every dollar I could, and spent weekends trying small projects no one understood. I was fascinated by things that changed over time: old furniture, run-down houses, anything that could become something new if someone invested enough work. That curiosity made adults nervous. They warned me not to drift too far from what was realistic, as if exploring was a sign of immaturity rather than initiative. Whitney didn't have to fight for approval. It arrived automatically. When she chose marketing as her major, the entire family reacted as though she had solved a complex puzzle. When I chose a degree that allowed more flexibility, people asked how I intended to turn that into something. The questions weren't cruel, but they chipped away at my confidence until I began hiding the things I cared about. It felt easier to let Whitney fill the room with her accomplishments than to explain why I didn't want the same life she wanted. After college, the difference widened again. Whitney moved into a stable job with a predictable ladder. My own path bent in unexpected directions. I tried corporate life for a year and felt like I was wearing someone else's skin. I left to work with small renovation crews, learning from contractors who transformed neglected spaces into homes people loved. It wasn't glamorous, and my family treated it like a phase I would outgrow. They talked about Whitney's promotions at dinner and asked me whether I had considered something steadier. They didn't see the satisfaction I found in turning broken things into something useful. They only saw instability, where I saw possibility. Years of these small imbalances built an unspoken hierarchy between us. Whitney didn't have to assert her place. The family had already built it for her. I learned to navigate around their expectations, to protect what mattered to me without asking for validation. But underneath that quiet acceptance lived a truth I refused to say out loud. Our family had spent so long treating me as optional that eventually my sister began to believe it too. In the years after college, the life I built for myself took a direction no one in my family could have predicted. It didn't happen quickly or with any dramatic turning point, just a slow accumulation of experience, observation, and a willingness to work in places most people avoided. I moved through different renovation crews, learning everything from demolition to layout planning, absorbing the logic behind materials, budgets, and timelines. What started as an escape from a job that never fit gradually became a skill set that shaped my entire future. What kept me going wasn't ambition in the traditional sense. It was the satisfaction of watching something broken transform under deliberate effort. I liked the way old houses held clues to their past and potential. I liked solving problems other people walked away from. And somewhere in that process, I started noticing opportunities that others overlooked. Properties with good bones, mismanaged rentals, neglected structures in neighborhoods ready for growth. I didn't have much money, but I had time, curiosity, and a willingness to take small, calculated risks. My first attempt at buying a place of my own was far from glamorous. It was a worn-down duplex with outdated wiring and a roof that sagged in the middle. Most people would have dismissed it, but I saw the layout possibilities and the potential rental value once it was restored. I lived in one unit while renovating the other, learning firsthand how every decision, every beam, faucet, and fixture affected the outcome. When I eventually sold it, the profit wasn't massive, but it was enough to make me realize I didn't need validation from anyone to prove I knew what I was doing. I just needed more chances. That's when I met Marcus Reed, a contractor who had built his reputation by turning distressed properties into desirable homes. We worked on a few small jobs together before deciding to partner on larger projects. Marcus had a practical eye and extensive industry contacts, and I brought an instinct for design potential and market timing. Our strengths balanced each other naturally. With him, I felt something I rarely experienced in my family. Someone who didn't underestimate me before I even opened my mouth. We didn't rush anything. Each project funded the next, and with each sale, we expanded our reach. We moved from small homes to multi-unit buildings, then to select high-end renovations that required precision and patience. The more we worked, the more our company evolved. From a simple partnership to a structured operation with analysts, designers, inspectors, and a small administrative team. It wasn't flashy, but it was steady. And every milestone came from work measured in long days and longer nights. The mansion entered the picture after one of our biggest acquisitions closed. It wasn't part of our inventory. It was personal. My first major purchase that wasn't tied to the business. Set against the Nevada tree line with wide windows facing the mountains, the property had belonged to a retired architect who treated it with care. It needed updates, but the structure was impeccable. Buying it felt like acknowledging how far I had come from the girl who was told to find something more secure. It represented stability, independence, and the confidence I had earned without anyone in my family cheering from the sidelines. For a long time, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I wasn't ready to move in, and I didn't want to sell it. When Whitney announced her engagement, the decision arrived almost effortlessly. I thought giving her the mansion would be a way to bridge the distance between us, a gesture that proved I still believed we could choose each other despite everything that had shaped us. I imagined surprising her, imagined her recognizing that the sister she had quietly dismissed had built something meaningful. Looking back, I can see how hopeful that thinking was. At the time, though, it felt like a step toward healing a divide that had existed longer than either of us admitted. I had no idea my attempt to close that distance would become the very thing that exposed just how deep it ran. As the wedding plans unfolded, the distance between us began showing itself in ways I couldn't ignore. It started with subtle exclusions, omissions so small that questioning them would have made me look overly sensitive. But subtlety has a way of accumulating, and each minor exclusion pressed just a little deeper into old wounds I had spent years quieting. I first noticed it when relatives began asking whether I had seen the venue photos that were circulating in the family chat. I hadn't. I wasn't in that chat. When I mentioned it to my parents, they brushed it off as an oversight, as if the absence of my number in a group dedicated entirely to the wedding of my only sibling was something that naturally slipped through the cracks. Their dismissal felt like a script they had repeated for years, minimizing things that clearly meant something to me because acknowledging them would force them to see the imbalance between us. More signs followed. Invitations for dress fittings were mentioned casually in conversations I wasn't part of. Weekends filled with wedding errands came and went without a single message asking whether I wanted to join. Even updates I should have been told directly, like changes in the ceremony structure or decisions about the bridal party, arrived through others, never from Whitney herself. It became obvious she was constructing her wedding without any piece of me attached, and the only reason I noticed anything at all was because people unintentionally revealed it. Despite that, I kept preparing. I told myself that exclusion didn't automatically mean rejection. Families get busy. People forget things. I leaned on these excuses because the alternative, that she didn't want me involved, felt heavier than I could admit. I focused on practical matters instead. Planning the trip, choosing a dress appropriate for a mountain resort, and writing the note I intended to place inside her gift. I wanted it to be simple, honest, and free of the emotional debris we had accumulated over the years. As the engagement season deepened, my parents grew increasingly absorbed in the excitement surrounding Whitney. Every phone call revolved around floral arrangements, rehearsal details, and updates on guests flying in. Whenever I asked a question, they answered with the same gentle impatience reserved for someone who needed catching up rather than someone who had been pushed out from the start. I tried not to take it personally, but even small interactions echoed the patterns I had grown up with. Patterns that made it clear whose story the family considered worth centering. There were moments when I wondered whether I was imagining the distance. Then a relative would mention a menu tasting I hadn't been invited to, or a custom detail Whitney had chosen that I was hearing about secondhand, and the illusion would dissolve. Each new detail confirmed what I didn't want to face. Whitney wasn't just excluding me from planning. She was curating a version of her life where I didn't occupy space at all. Still, I held on to the idea that showing up mattered, that attending the wedding, even quietly, even at the edges, was an act of commitment to the relationship I hoped we could salvage. I believed that giving her the mansion would flip the narrative, prove to her, and maybe to the rest of the family, that I had built something meaningful on my own terms. I imagined the gesture opening a door instead of closing one. In the days leading up to the trip, that hope was the only thing I carried with certainty. The mansion felt like a bridge, something sturdy enough to reconnect what years of small imbalances had pulled apart. I didn't anticipate celebration or gratitude. I only wanted acknowledgement that we were still capable of choosing each other. But optimism has a way of blinding you to what's already decided, and somewhere within the quiet spaces of those final days, the truth had already taken shape. The wedding I was preparing to attend was one my sister had never intended for me to be part of. By the time winter approached the year before the wedding, the distance between me and my family had been in place long enough that it almost felt like tradition. Their expectations of me had narrowed into one predictable shape, and they reacted with confusion whenever I stepped outside it. That's probably why I stopped talking about my work altogether. Silence was easier than constantly defending the choices I made. When I first moved to Reno after college, I had taken a job at a small housing nonprofit. It wasn't glamorous, and certainly not the corporate path my parents believed defined stability. I was drawn to the work because it felt real, meeting people who needed homes, negotiating with developers who didn't always see beyond the bottom line, and learning that the right deal could change someone's entire future. My family dismissed it as temporary community work, assuming I'd eventually follow Whitney into the world of marketing or finance. I didn't correct them. Their assumptions acted like a buffer, keeping them from asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Over the years, my responsibilities grew. I became the point person for large-scale housing acquisitions, managing portfolios that required discretion, legal precision, and relentless negotiation. The work was demanding in ways my family would never understand, the kind that didn't come with flashy titles but offered influence quietly. I preferred it that way. I didn't need applause, and I didn't need to justify my choices to people who measured worth through salary brackets and office buildings. The fewer details they knew, the easier it was to work without commentary. Everything shifted 3 years ago when the nonprofit partnered with a private foundation focused on restoring historic mountain properties. I was assigned to oversee several acquisitions, including a sprawling estate overlooking Lake Tahoe, an older mansion that had fallen into disrepair but sat on land worth far more than its failing structure suggested. The negotiations were complicated. The owner needed a quick sale to resolve financial issues, and the foundation wanted a discreet transaction. I brokered the deal, managed inspections, handled the legal coordination, and presented a restoration plan that eventually secured additional investors. Months later, the lead investor approached me privately. He told me they were expanding their housing division and needed someone who understood both community impact and high-value acquisitions. They offered me a senior role, one that would let me oversee large projects without sacrificing the mission that mattered to me. I accepted quietly. My family assumed I was still doing charity work, and I didn't correct them. Letting them underestimate me became an unexpected advantage. It freed me from their scrutiny and let me grow without their opinions hanging over every decision. My salary increased, and so did the opportunities. When the mansion owner defaulted on a secondary agreement, the estate unexpectedly returned to the foundation. The investors weren't interested in keeping it, and after several discussions, they agreed to sell it to me under a private arrangement. I bought the property outright. It wasn't just a purchase, it symbolized the independence I had built from the pieces of my life they believed were failures. I intended to restore it and eventually turn it over to a program that supported women transitioning out of difficult circumstances, something I had dreamed of for years. But when Whitney's wedding invitations went out, and my name appeared almost as an afterthought, the idea of using the mansion as a gesture toward her resurfaced. I convinced myself it could soften the distance between us, maybe even remind her that our relationship mattered beyond titles and image. I imagined giving her the keys as a quiet acknowledgement that despite everything, I wanted her happiness. That hope carried me through months of being sidelined, ignored, and treated as though my life existed in the margins. I clung to the belief that generosity might rebuild something that time and imbalance had worn down. What I didn't realize then was that the gift I planned to give her was the very thing that would expose how little space I held in her view of family. The truth wasn't in what I offered. It was in how easily she believed I had nothing worth offering at all. By the time I reached the resort on the afternoon of the rehearsal day, the air felt colder than the weather should have allowed. The drive up the mountain had been calm, but the calm didn't follow me inside. The lobby shimmered with soft lights and polished stone, the kind of elegance meant to impress people who measured value by aesthetics alone. I told myself to breathe, to focus, to simply walk to the check-in desk and do what every other guest did. I gave my name. The staff member typed it in, then typed it again. The slight hesitation on his face was enough to tell me everything before he even spoke. He apologized, brows tightening as if he wished the screen in front of him would magically correct itself. He asked me to step aside so he could contact the wedding coordinator. My hands felt steady, though my stomach settled into the familiar heaviness of recognition. I knew this sensation too well, expecting nothing but somehow, still hoping to be wrong. I walked toward a quieter corner near the fireplace, watching other guests glide through check-in with ease. Some were dressed casually, others in upscale mountain attire, all of them carrying the bright anticipation that weddings tend to bring. I stood outside that current, an observer, not a participant. A woman passing by glanced at me with a polite smile, unaware that I was waiting to hear whether my own sister had decided I didn't belong. When the call from the staff member didn't come quickly enough, I pulled out my phone and dialed Whitney. She answered after a few rings, her voice bright and breathless, as if she had been laughing. I told her I had arrived and that my name wasn't coming up in the system. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that belonged to surprise. It was the silence of someone preparing an explanation she already believed would justify itself. When she finally spoke, her tone shifted into something clipped, composed, and foreign. She said she didn't think I would come. She said the guest list had changed. Then she added something else, something rehearsed, something she must have thought would soften the blow. It didn't. She explained that certain attendees had specific expectations, and she didn't want anyone feeling uncomfortable. The implication hung in the space between each word. She meant me. She meant that I didn't match the image she wanted to present. I listened without interrupting. By the time she finished, the distance she had spent years building had settled completely into place. I thanked her for answering the call, not because gratitude was appropriate, but because it was the only thing I could manage without letting emotion disrupt the steadiness I needed. I ended the conversation, slipped my phone back into my bag, and reached for the cream envelope I had carried since the day I purchased the mansion. For weeks, I had imagined handing it to her during a quiet moment at the reception, maybe after a toast or during a lull in conversation. Now it felt strange to hold something intended to honor a relationship that no longer existed in the form I recognized. I walked back to the check-in desk. The staff member straightened when he saw me approaching, preparing to offer another apology. Instead, I placed the envelope gently on the counter and asked that it be delivered to the bride after the ceremony. I didn't explain its contents. I didn't explain anything. The gesture no longer required context. As I stepped outside, the cold mountain air rushed against my face, sharp enough to clear my thoughts. The parking lot glowed under strings of lights hung for the wedding weekend. Guests moved in and out of the lobby, unaware of the quiet decision unfolding at its edge. I walked to my car without looking back. Every assumption I had carried with me dissolved in the space between the resort doors and the driver's seat. When I finally started the engine, the only certainty I had was that leaving was the first real boundary I had set with my sister in years. And for once, I didn't need her to understand it. In the days that followed, the quiet after leaving the resort felt heavier than anything that had happened there. I kept my phone on the counter, face down, knowing it would eventually start filling with calls once the reception ended and Whitney opened the envelope. I didn't plan to answer, but I wanted to see how long it would take for the fallout to begin. It started the following morning. 9 missed calls, then 12, then dozens. Whitney tried every method. Calls, texts, voice messages, each one more frantic than the last. I didn't listen to any of them fully, just enough to hear the panic threaded through her voice. She had finally seen what I placed inside the envelope. The finalized documents confirming the mansion transfer to a housing foundation, including the valuation she had always dreamed of, but never expected to be associated with my name. By afternoon, my parents began calling too. Their messages were a mixture of confusion and disbelief. They asked how I had purchased the mansion, why I hadn't told anyone, and what I meant by donating it. They spoke as though they had been completely blindsided by my choices, as if my life existed only in the spaces they could see and the narratives they understood. I didn't respond, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to explain. I heard the rest through extended family who contacted me quietly, without urgency. Cousins who had never taken sides, only observed. They told me the reception came to a halt after Whitney opened the envelope. They said guests stopped talking, music faded into the background, and the staff didn't know whether to continue serving or clear tables. Someone had pulled up the foundation's website on their phone, showing the confirmation of the donation and my name attached to the acquisition. The realization spread quickly. The mansion Whitney believed aligned with her version of success had slipped out of reach before she even knew it had been in front of her. Robert didn't take the revelation well. His family, invested heavily in the image of stability, questioned the optics of his wife being linked to a public spectacle involving property worth millions. Several business partners voiced concerns about judgment and discretion. One contract negotiation reportedly stalled because a senior investor didn't want association with personal drama overshadowing professional decisions. It didn't destroy his career, but it slowed the momentum he had built. And in a world where impressions matter, slowing down can feel like falling backward. Whitney, from what I was told, shut herself in the bridal suite for hours after guests left. Some relatives tried comforting her, though others whispered that exclusion always carries a cost, and she had simply underestimated the weight of the one she had chosen to bear. 3 days later, my parents drove to my place unannounced. I didn't open the door. I listened from the other side as they insisted we resolve the misunderstanding, unaware that the true misunderstanding had always been theirs. They believed my silence meant absence, my privacy meant lack of accomplishment, and my restraint meant insignificance. When they finally left, the hallway grew quiet again, and for the first time, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I returned to work the next week, slipping back into the rhythm of projects that mattered to me. My colleagues treated me the same as always, measured, respectful, grounded in the work rather than the noise surrounding it. That normalcy was its own form of clarity. My worth had never depended on whether my family recognized it, and losing their approval had not altered the life I had built. Whitney continued sending messages for several weeks. Some apologized, some pleaded, others tried to justify her decisions. I didn't respond to any of them. Her remorse wasn't something I needed, and forgiveness wasn't something I owed. Distance was the first choice I made for myself without seeking permission, and the longer I kept it, the more I understood it was the right one. The mansion changed hands smoothly, becoming part of a program designed to support women rebuilding their lives. Knowing that space would offer safety and possibility to people who needed it felt more meaningful than any symbolic gesture ever could have. As the months passed, the silence from my family settled into something steady, not hostile, not warm, simply quiet. And in that quiet, I finally felt ownership of a truth I had spent years resisting. Sometimes the only way to protect the life you've built is to walk away from the people who never learned how to see it.